Click play and call it work.
Matthew here from MiniWargaming.com, and welcome to this episode of Sit and Talk, the show where you can ask me questions about, well, whatever you want. Normally we do the show on a weekly basis on Thursdays live on Twitch, but obviously that's been interfered with COVID-19. So I've decided I will take up the mantle of doing this show, and I'll try to do it every week. This week I plan on having 2 episodes out for our Vault members because it is our free Vault week, so I hope that you're enjoying that. And so you can look for 2 episodes, and I've got, I think, enough questions to cover both of those episodes right away. But in future episodes, if you would like to ask questions, just make sure to leave a comment below. And I will be sure to, I will try to do my best to answer all of the questions in the next Sit and Talk. Well, the next one will probably be more of these questions, and then after that, well, you kind of get the idea. And so these will be posted sporadically. I don't have a set date that they'll always come out, but I am going to try to keep up on them just to kind of connect from our home isolation quarantine bunkers, as you will. Also, a couple little announcements really quickly. First off, there's obviously the free Vault week. So second off, we have our gift card charity thingy. I'm not sure what to call it, but that is where if you go to shop.miniwargaming.com, if you buy a gift card from there that you can use in future purchases at shop.miniwargaming.com for our merch or magnets or dice or shirts or measuring widgets, all that kind of stuff, you can go check out everything you can buy there. We're going to take half of all the revenue we generate from the gift card sales and we're going to donate it to charity. Half of it's going to go to a local charity of ours called Open Arms Mission, which helps to feed those who are less fortunate. And the other half will go towards the World Health Organization's COVID-19 relief response thing. I can't remember the exact name of it off the top of my head, but essentially it helps to track and follow the virus. It also helps frontline workers in some areas. They have a bunch of different things to do. The links, if you actually go to shop.miniwargaming.com and you click on the gift card, we have links to both of the organizations that we'll be donating to. So if you want to help out, then that is a way to do that. The other 50% of the gift card obviously we'll be using to pay for the product. Now, most of the products in our store cost us half of what we sell them for, and so essentially we're giving away products at cost in order to try to raise funds to help these very well-deserving organizations. And last announcement is I'm still collecting submissions for my idea of a show. If I can get enough submissions, I'll probably do this show. It's called Happy Wargaming, and it was inspired by John Krasinski, that got Jim Halpert from The Office. He's got a new show called Some Good News. You can search for Some Good News on YouTube. It's actually really good. And he's just like, hey, let's just tell good news because there's a lot of bad news going on right now. There always is, but especially right now, it seems that we're just always being bombarded with this coronavirus stuff. And I thought, that's a really good idea. I'd like to do that for miniature wargaming specifically, so that's why I'm going to call it Happy Wargaming. And so if you want to send me your submissions, email matthew@miniwargaming.com with a subject line Happy Wargaming and tell me anything that you think would be good news related to miniature wargaming and as it relates to this pandemic, whether it's projects that you're able to complete because of it or companies that you are seeing do really good things because of the pandemic, or whatever it happens to be. Send that to me, and then we'll see what comes of that. If I can get enough of that, like I said, I'm thinking of starting a new show, or at least do 1 episode of that show. Anyways, let's just jump right into the questions. And remember, if you want me to answer your questions in the future, just leave a comment below. So let's just jump right into this. Spruce Moose, and these questions were asked. We basically put up a Facebook post, so some of these are from Facebook, some of these are from YouTube. I believe these first ones are from Facebook, but I just copied and pasted them and got rid of the formatting, so I don't quite remember. So Spruce Moose, when do you think the Warhammer Old World will and should take place? Are there any specific units or factions you want to see? That's interesting. I wonder what their plans are for that. So those of you that don't know, Games Workshop announced a while back, like within the past few months, that I don't know exactly what they've announced. They've said that they're bringing in Warhammer Old World, which they've insinuated is the Warhammer Fantasy World, so before Age of Sigmar. I'm assuming before the end times of Warhammer Fantasy. And so what exactly is that game going to look like? They hinted at the fact that there might be square bases, but who knows? Who knows exactly what their plans are? It's still years away. And so where do I think it should take place? Well, they have a few options. If you look at like Horus Heresy, they could have this kind of a similar vein to Horus Heresy, where it's not just one time period, but it's a stretch of a historic time period. And so it's not like it has to happen before the end times or during the end times. It could include content from both, allowing the players to then decide where they want to play. It does put a little bit more work on the players to make sure, well, if they care, to have everything be accurate to the era that they're playing. For example, obviously during the end times, new things were introduced. So if you're playing pre-end times, you wouldn't have those things the way that they are. Like Nagash pre and during end times is obviously very different, as well as many other things that happened. But I don't know if they're going to do that. I have a funny feeling they'll keep it simpler than that and just choose a time before the end times, and it'll give them an excuse to go back to Warhammer Fantasy. But at the same time, I doubt that they're just going to be like, hey, play with all your old miniatures. I'm sure that'll be legal and valid, but I'm also sure they'll come out with new lines to update a lot of those miniatures. Hopefully, at the same time, making a lot of them compatible with Age of Sigmar. I'm thinking of like the Free Guild line, the Dispossessed line, the Dark Elves, the High Elves. Obviously, they're coming out with a new Lumineth, so that I don't know if that replaces the High Elves in a sense, but whatever happens to be. Any specific units or faction I want to see? Well, I think that I want to see things that they can also bring into Age of Sigmar. Not because I don't want to play Warhammer Old World, because I do plan on playing it, but because it's just nice when things kind of have that multi-purpose. I'm thinking like Demons for 40k and Age of Sigmar, how they can be played in both games. It's nice to be able to collect something that works in both. But also because I've been really enjoying playing the Cities of Sigmar Battletome. And that basically is just an amalgamation of a lot of the older miniatures, not all of them, a lot of the older miniatures. So I'd love to see more of that kind of stuff, because I love the regular people part. They're doing a great job in Age of Sigmar with the high fantasy part, like the crazy Stormcast Eternals and Night Haunt and all the undead stuff and these huge ogres and now the new giants, basically. They're going for all that super high fantasy, but I think that it would be a bad idea if they just ignored the low fantasy parts of the world as well, because that does exist. If you read some of the novels, you see that, yeah, the world might be high fantasy, but the day-to-day life is still kind of the low fantasy that you see in things typical of like Dungeons and Dragons. So it would be nice if they brought in more of that kind of stuff too, and that's just a lot of the older Warhammer Fantasy stuff. It was a high fantasy setting as well, but there's also a lot of just lower fantasy kind of themes as well. So I'd love to see all of that, and I'm very excited for it. I know I'm not huge into Warhammer Fantasy, but that's mainly because there's two main reasons. One, I love terrain, and so Warhammer Fantasy, while it can be played at terrain, is often better played in more open things. Now, I actually am somebody who likes to put more terrain on the table than a typical Warhammer Fantasy board, because it forces you to think differently. I also do that when I played like War Machine and Hordes, where people are playing with flat terrain. I'm like, no, put three-dimensional terrain. It's like, well, that screws up a lot of the way the thing. I'm like, great, it makes you think differently, and that's what I appreciate. So I do look forward to playing it. I like the idea of playing a game that's actually being supported and that's getting updates. Klaus Family, what is the worst game of 40k you've ever played, and compare contrast it to the best one you've had? Well, it's hard to pick the worst and the best, but I can tell you at least a bad one. There's one that we filmed a few months ago. It never got posted because there was a lot of technical issues, and that's okay. I played Tyranids, and Luca played Iron Hands, and I don't know if that's the absolute worst. There's been a couple 40k games of Space Marines recently that I'd say are pretty bad experiences. The Iron Hands versus Tyranids, basically, you can probably predict what happened. I had never played against Iron Hands before, and to be fair, Luca didn't even bring the most cheesy of lists. And so I thought, well, how can I was trying to figure out how I could to deal with them and list tailor against it, just because I knew that they're that powerful. And basically, first turn, he killed half of my guys off the table. And not just that, but he used some stratagems from the Tech Priest and his Thunderfire Cannon to slow down the units that remained. So I couldn't even basically move up. And then second turn, he just destroyed the rest off the table. And it was really kind of boring. Another game I played against Steve, he played Dark Angels versus my Genes to the Cult, and he actually destroyed 75% of my army in his first shooting phase, and he went first. So he moved up, killed 75% of my army, and that was it. So the 40k, with at least with Space Marines recently, seems to have hit this point where it's turning into it needs some adjustments. Let's just put it that way. But the main offenders are obviously the Space Marines, and I'm not huge into like super tournament meta. All I know is like the more local friendly kind of meta, but it's hard to tone it down when the Space Marines have so much going for them. Now, having said that, that doesn't mean that there's no way to play those two together. But those are, if you're asking what my worst experiences lately, those weren't that great. My best experiences with 40K, or my best game of 40K, I don't know if I can pick one, and I don't even know if I can remember one specifically. I can just tell you the kinds of things that have happened. It's usually the games where it goes down to turn 6 or turn 7. Both sides have lost most of their forces. They're neck and neck, and it all comes down to some very important dice rolls. Even if that dice roll is, do we go to turn 7? That kind of stuff. I love games that end like that, where both sides, and I love when both sides just destroy each other. I don't like when neither side loses models, and I don't like when one side obviously just destroys the other side without any repercussions. That's never any fun. Tim Brown, what are your thoughts on the Lumineth and the lore coming out about them, like the Matriarchal Society of Iliatha, the most populous Lumineth nation thanks to magical cloning? I'll be honest, I haven't actually super kept up on the Lumineth stuff. I've looked at the pictures and the models, and they look really cool. It's an interesting choice to have like the cow god avatar thingy. I have mixed feelings about that model. I think it looks fantastic and yet a little wacky at the same time. But I don't know. I think I'll grow to really like that model. But I'm not huge yet into their lore. I haven't had a chance to do that, so I can't. Unfortunately, I can't really answer that question much more than that, Tim. Teddy Bear, are there any rules from Age of Sigmar you think would benefit Warhammer 40K? Yes. I actually think there's rules from both games that would benefit each other. I don't know if I would ever say that Games Workshop should just amalgamate the rules into one, but part of me says the games are similar enough that you can do that. I am not one to say every miniature war game should have the same set of perfect rules. I think that every different kind of game tries to achieve different things and therefore should focus on the things to achieve that. Like if you're playing a post-apocalyptic game and you're really wanting to focus on the scrappy nature and the survival aspect of it, then things like having your gun run out of ammo or those little granular details are appropriate, where obviously if you're playing a game of 40K and your bolters run out of ammo, it doesn't really add much to the game, it just adds tediousness to it. But Warhammer 40K and Age of Sigmar essentially run similarly. Age of Sigmar seems to focus more on the close combat and 40K on shooting, but that's not in the rules. That's just more in the armies that are created. And you might think, well, sci-fi will have more shooting. It's like, no, there's plenty of sci-fi out there that can focus more on close combat. There is ways to do that, and 40K kind of has that style that it definitely would allow for that too. Like just play the game Space Marine, and you see that, yeah, while he does do plenty of shooting, he also does plenty of close combat. So I don't know if the games would perfectly match each other. There's parts of me that like the strength versus toughness aspect of 40K over the static to hit and to wound of Age of Sigmar, but then there's other parts of me that like the static to hit and to wound. I think what I would say is reverse. I would introduce the strength and toughness to Age of Sigmar. That would allow for some interesting, obviously the whole game would have to be restructured, but that would allow for more balance of like hordes versus monsters, because that's it's hard to make monsters work or they're either that or they become too powerful. Like it seems to be hard to find that nice middle ground. When you put a blob of 60 guys down, it can be really hard to shake them, because it's just, a wound is a wound is a wound. In Age of Sigmar, obviously the save can make a difference, but when there's 60 wounds in front of you, and even if they just have a 5-up or a 6-up save, that can be really hard to shake, especially with Inspiring Presence. So I don't know. I'd say I would get rid of, if I was to come from Age of Sigmar to 40K, I think I'd apply their command point structure over the 40K one. The stratagems to me have become a little too bloated, and while interesting, I feel like a lot of the rules and stratagems should just be part of the rules of the data sheets, because that's how they used to be. Like you saw when they first came out with 8th edition, a lot of the rules that were already in the data sheets got pulled over to stratagems. I'm thinking of specific examples like Space Marine Predators. If you had 3 of them, they had an extra bonus. Now it's a stratagem that you use 3 of them, spend a stratagem, and you get that extra bonus. Bring 3 Vindicators and you got this bonus. Now it's you got to have 3 Vindicators and use a stratagem. And that's fine if there's just a handful of stratagems, but there's so many that it really messes with the meta of the game, and it adds to the complexity of it as well. And I'm not a big fan of that. I find that the game is more fun once you're at turn 3 and both players are pretty much out of command points, and it's just like, let's just roll some dice. And so Age of Sigmar is more that way, although they can start to get more command point heavy with some of the armies too. I'm looking at the Bone Reapers, obviously. But they're at that earlier stage of it's dialed back more. There's not nearly as many. And those things are part of the War Scrolls. There are some game-wide ones, but there's only a few of those. Samoth Nifrig, can you explain what a Tyranid Norn Queen is? Ooh, that is... Oh... A Tyranid Norn Queen is an organism that, this has been a while since I've read about Norn Queens. It used to actually be a model in Epic, I believe. I believe a Norn Queen produces other Tyranids, and so it's not typically a frontline thing. And also, I think it's mostly been retconned away. Like nothing's ever fully retconned away. You can always bring it back, right? But yeah, it's just a larger Tyranid model. You know what? Let's see. I don't know if I can answer that quickly, but I will try. The wonderful thing is the world of the internet and wikis. So, a Norn Queen, also sometimes referred to as a splicer beast, is a highly intelligent Tyranid bioform that leads the great Tyranid swarms and directs the evolutionary paths that they take as they adapt to each new environment or tactical need. They live upon massive hive ships and huge chambers at the center of the hive fleet and ingest genetic materials. There's a lot written here. So basically it's like one of the center brains, one of the center things as well. Now, looking at the sources for this, you're looking at the 4th edition Tyranid Codex, which obviously is a while ago. You've got the White Dwarf episode 146, which is a while ago. You got the Warriors of Ultramar novel, which was made years ago, and the Advanced Space Crusade booklet, which is a board game that was made a very long time ago. So they're basically one of the reproducers, and they direct some of the stuff for the Hive Fleet. I'm not sure how relevant they still are, but it's still a fun idea. Ooh, now let's get back to my questions. And then next question from Samoth. And why can't we have a giant Forge World model of it that poops out Carnifex broods every turn? It would have to be a big model. I believe the Norn Queens are supposed to be enormous. Like I said, they were in Epic, but they were really big in Epic. Connell Kuan, do-it-yourself terrain. I'm stuck at home but I have a bunch of styrofoam and electric cutting pen. Any tips or suggestions? Oh, yeah, and this might sound lame, but search online for tips and suggestions because there are tons of great tutorials out there on making your own terrain. Something I used to do a lot years and years ago. Now I don't have as much time, and we got so much terrain coming from companies that I don't have to. But there's a lot that you can do with styrofoam and make really good terrain. That was my favorite part of the hobby, and still is terrain. But back then, when I first got into Lord of the Rings, my favorite thing was making styrofoam terrain to play with Lord of the Rings. I just loved doing it. Zachary Nemisek, if you had an unlimited budget, what would you put it into hobby-wise? New armies for each system, new terrain. See, that's a hard question because if it's unlimited, then I'd get everything. I would own every army, tons of it, every terrain. I'd have a bigger building in which to house all of this. So unlimited is a hard question to ask. Let's bring it back a little bit and say, let's say if we had a limited but large, what would I focus on? I think if I was looking at mini wargaming stuff, I would probably rejuvenate two things. One is I'd probably get a few more shelves worth of terrain just to get more variety. There'd be several armies that I would probably scrap and redo. I'd actually take my Tyranid army and about half of it I would redo just because I had painted it. It's really old. I wouldn't throw it out or anything. Maybe I'd sell it. Whatever. So let's not worry about, but your old stuff is nostalgic. I'm not saying I'd throw it out. It's just more like it'd be nice to have newer stuff. Also, filling out these other Space Marine chapters. Like we don't have a lot of Ultramarines. We need more White Scars, Imperial Fists, all the standard Space Marine chapters would be nice to have. We have our custom one, the Sentinels of the Forge, which we could then play as any successor chapter, so you can play it that way. But people appreciate seeing the actual OG ones as well. So those are the couple things I'd focus on right there. XYZ Dude 01. Oh no, sorry, that's one day ago. What is your wish list for the rumored 9th edition that is supposed to come out following the Psychic Awakening series? That is a huge rumor because it hasn't even been hinted at from Games Workshop as far as I know. But if there was a 9th edition coming out, what would my wish list be? See, some people say, do you think it's become... I think there's even a question here somewhere that, do you think it's become bloated with too many extra books? And I think games benefit from having tons of books. Where the bloat comes from is not so much too many source books, but it's more in the meta of the armies itself. And that what happens in pretty much any game is that the company will keep one-upping itself with the next book. And you come to this critical point, like I feel at 40K is at that right now, where it's just like everything's done turn 1 or turn 2. You know, heavy shooting armies are just going to obliterate. Whoever goes first is going to have too much of an advantage. And that's because of all these things, all the amount of shooting, the amount of things that just ignore. Here, actually, yeah, this is the thing that bothers me. The longer a game is around, and pretty much every game I've played that has gotten more and more updates to their rules suffers from the same problem, is they always start with really good core rules, and then over time, they just keep breaking those rules. They start off with a few armies that really follow those rules, and then they're like, now this army is special because it breaks this rule. This army is special because it breaks this rule. This army is special because it breaks this rule. But the problem with that is it messes with the meta to the point where it can become unenjoyable. For example, and this is just a little one, when you look at Age of Sigmar and you look at Bravery, when the game first came out, Bravery and Battle Shock was a huge part of the game. It still is, but it was incredibly important. A Stormcast Eternal Liberator, which is basically your Space Marine tactical squad, had a bravery of 6, which means if they're in a squad of 5 and you just lost one of them, you could lose another one due to a failed Battle Shock test. And they didn't have the Space Marines and They Shall Know No Fear reroll. They didn't have access to their special Storm hosts where they could do the one that gave them +1 bravery or all this other stuff. The only thing they really had access to was Inspiring Presence, and that was, you know, a limited commodity because there wasn't a lot of ways to get extra command points besides bringing War Scroll battalions. And I thought that was really cool. I'm like, okay, yeah, the base one is 6. But then they came out with all the death armies, and all the death armies had braveries of 10, and all the demons have braveries of 10. And I don't like that. I don't like saying a blanket statement, well, they're demons, so, you know. It's like, no. You can come up with reasons for anything. Like, same thing with Necrons. I don't like that they're leadership 10 across the board. It should be 7, 8, 9, all that. And now that's not the worst thing though, because if you have a unit of 30 skeletons and you kill 15 of them, then even bravery 10, you're still going to crumble a bunch more. So whatever. You got Inspiring Presence to override that, and we can talk about whether Inspiring Presence is good or not, but that's not the point of what I'm trying to say. What's happened is then you get other armies that manipulate that bravery. You get a banner that gives you +1 bravery, or you get a banner that gives nearby enemies -1 bravery. Or you get the ogres with their bellowers who give nearby enemies -1 bravery. Or you're on a griffin, which gives -1 bravery. Or you have a spell, which gives -2 bravery to everybody nearby. Or a command trait. You've got all these really cool combos of how you can really try to whittle away at the bravery of a unit. And then what happens? Well, you get Bone Reapers that come out and say, we are just immune to Battle Shock. Or you get more and more command abilities, which is like, no, it's not Inspiring Presence where you just give one unit immunity to Battle Shock. We're going to give everybody wholly within 24 inches immunity to Battle Shock. Or if you bring this specific Storm host or whatever, then you're immune to Battle Shock if you're this close to whatever. And, you know, some of those smaller bubbles are fine, but I found over time that Battle Shock became less and less important. It's still a thing, but it's just, you can't count on that aspect of the game being in there. And then on top of that, then they just update the Stormcast Eternals, and now the Liberators are Bravery 7. And that's because every other army that kept coming out, they kept upping the bravery of things. And so all of a sudden the Liberators' bravery of 6 didn't make sense. And I find that happens, that it's hard for a company to seem to have the discipline to stay within the core idea of their rules, and that more and more things ignore the core rules. 40K, The good example for that one that I see is they have this really cool set of rules for weapons. They've got assault weapons, they've got heavy weapons, they've got grenades, they've got pistols, and so forth, and rapid fire, so forth. And those, it's a really cool basis of the game, because then all of a sudden you have your heavy weapon guys who, if they move, they get a penalty. And the assault ones are the ones that are meant to get in your face. But even if they could advance and shoot at a -1 penalty, but they still have that option. And rapid fire was really good at close range. But then you enter in with armies that or units or entire armies that's just all of a sudden it's like they just ignore heavy. Okay, so they can move and shoot without any penalty. It's like, all right, if it's like the Chaos Havocs for Chaos, where it's just the Chaos Havocs and not the rest of the army, that's fine. But they get the Iron Hands that just ignore it. And then they're like, oh, and by the way, in this, coming back to Iron Hands, obviously, not only do they ignore heavy, but they reroll ones to hit when firing heavy. Oh, and they've got like 3 different ways to give +1 ballistic skill. So now everybody's just shooting on 2s, re-rolling. And it's just like, but that's just basically hitting. Like there's no real roll to hit when it's 2s to hit re-rolling. You're taking away that element of the game. And that, to me, is just like, you kind of want to stick within your core rules and have those things in there. So to me, that's what's become bloated in any game. 40K is at that point. They hit that point probably months ago, maybe a year ago, where it started to get that kind of meta bloat. Age of Sigmar is not quite there yet, but it's slowly moving towards that. And so that's why they then need to do in a new edition, and it kind of resets everything back to a certain level. Maybe. Depends on how they do the new edition. If it's like an 8.5, where it's just some polishing of the rules, that won't do it, because you still have the meta-specific things. But if it's like going from 7th to 8th, where they did like a hard reset, that was really refreshing to see everything kind of get. And it's not that everything got perfectly balanced. It's more just that everything focused more on the core rules before a million stratagems were released and all this other stuff that could just ignore them. So my wish list would be to simplify. If I had total control, I would rewrite a lot of the chapter tactics and chapter specific stuff, and not just for the Space Marines but for other armies as well. I would remove a lot of the stratagems and put them into the actual data sheets of the units instead. I would revamp a lot of that. The other thing I would like is to really revamp the way that you build an army. I like and I'm going to sound like such a boomer, even though I'm not a boomer. But it's a typical kind of veteran speak that once you've been in the hobby for a while, you're like, oh, I want this thing the way it used to be. It's like, I don't want everything to go back to the way it used to be. I like 8th edition way more than 7th edition. But the one thing that I don't like about 8th edition, and I never liked it from the beginning, was all these different detachments that basically allowed you to build your army however you wanted. See, in older editions of 40K, it's pretty much just the combined arms attachment, which was HQ, 2 troops, and then you could bring 4 more troops, 1 more HQ, 3 elites, 3 fast, 3 heavy, and then there was like an allied detachment where you could bring in a few extra things. And that was basically it. And then it just kind of got more and more complicated. 7th edition introduced a lot of formations, which in my mind kind of skewed the game a little too much. But even older editions of 40K would introduce things like, well, if your captain is on a bike, then bikes are troop choices. And I didn't even like that. I was like, no. If we want to play bikes are your main thing, you play Planet Strike. Because Planet Strike, you had the attackers, they got more fast attack and elites, and they didn't have to bring any troops. And the defenders got more heavy support and more troops, and not as many elites and fast attack. To me, that's what you do. You play these different modes of the game where the 2 players are kind of playing the same thing. And at the very least, because you got like the patrol detachment, battalion, and the brigade. Those are okay. The brigade maybe is a little too much. But then you have all these auxiliary detachments. At the very least, those ones should only be allowed if, like, for every battalion detachment, then you can bring the vanguard or spearhead or whatever. And the supreme command detachment should not be the only detachment that you have. I know that they've fixed that to some degree in certain areas, but seeing that for a little while just kind of didn't feel right. It feels more like a bunch of formations. So I think they should simplify how armies are made and go back to that, because I think that would help as well. I won't fix everything. When I played that Iron Hands versus Tyranids game against Luca, when you look at his list, it actually would fit in a combined arms attachment. He didn't spam like anything. He had like 1 of each of these things, and it was still great. So it's not going to fix every problem. It can just make things feel a little nicer. is what I would do. So those are some of the things I would do for 9th edition. So Max Bain, I feel 40k has an issue with first turn shooting armies being overpowered. Agreed. And if so, how could it be fixed? Well, it depends on the army, but yeah, overall, I feel like it's becoming more of a shooting game. How do you fix that? Okay, well, I guess I can add more things what I do for 9th edition. Remove Overwatch. Make fall back. Make it. I don't know if I'd remove falling back, but I'd definitely make it harder, because falling back makes sense to a certain degree, but I don't know, introduce that the people get to make another attack against them, kind of like opportunity attacks from Dungeons and Dragons, or make it like a test of sorts to see if you can fall back rather than just being automatically able to do it. Heck, even making it a stratagem. I know I said don't have as many stratagems, but I'm okay with like game-wide stratagems. Like everybody has access to the command point reroll, to the 2 command points ignore your leadership test, or the 2 command points you get to fight next rather than your opponent. After they nominate someone who charged and fought. I don't mind adding more of those generic ones, because everybody has access to those, and so you get to learn them and everybody gets to know those ones, as long as there's not too many of them. But yeah, make it a stratagem to fall back instead of just being able to do it. So those are just a few of the things. Basically, make close combat more effective. They've already got the whole if you charged, you get to fight first. And I'd actually keep that for 40k. As much as I love the Age of Sigmar's version, Age of Sigmar is more of a close combat game. And so allowing everybody who charged to go first would actually not work in that game as well. And you see that in things like the Orc War Clans, where they get to do that, and it's fairly devastating. And even the new Lumineth that are coming out are going to get a version of that, where they get to have 2 units for every unit. And I think that might actually, we'll see if that's a problem or not, but I have a funny feeling it will be. But yeah, make close combat more effective. I don't know if I'd get rid of random charge lengths or just allow you to charge a certain distance. I'm not sure if that's necessary. The randomness is kind of nice, and at the same time kind of frustrating. You could, like I said, I would get rid of all those rapid fire things. Like, cool, Space Marines get to always rapid fire if they're a Terminator or if they didn't move. It's like, well, that just encourages static gun lines for the intercessors and all that. But I don't know. I would amp up how strong close combat is. Get rid of Overwatch altogether. Maybe give Tau a version of it, because that's kind of their thing. But yeah, those are some ideas. No, this is just me sitting in my cozy chair in my home isolation quarantine bunker. I'm not the one that's actually responsible for writing rules for millions of people, so it's easy for me just to make suggestions, because I'm not the one that has to take the flack if they're not good. David Ziegler. Okay, man. Remember I said I was wondering if I can get through all these questions? There's a lot more to go. My friends and I are planning a 40k escalation league this summer, and the goal is as big of an apocalypse game as we can at the end. Do you know of any software we can use to keep track of everything? Not specifically made for that, no. And except, I guess, like there's Battlescribe. You can keep track of your army in that. And are there any common mistakes to avoid when organizing this kind of league? Yes. Yeah, definitely. Don't make it too long. I love the idea of a big apocalypse game at the end. It gives people something to plan towards. But definitely don't make it too long. Only make it 4 to 6 weeks at most. And be prepared for people to drop out or want to join later on, and make it work for that. So those are the main things. If you make leagues too long, they'll more often they won't reach completion. It's much more satisfying to have a shorter league that finishes, because then it kind of gets people excited to do more. And then maybe once you've done a couple shorter ones and you feel that there's a core group of people that will really stick around, then do longer ones. And that goes for anything. That goes for narrative campaigns. That goes for running Dungeons and Dragons campaigns. Start small, do short ones first. Not necessarily one-shots, but short run campaigns. And then as you get a feel for who's going to really commit, then that gives you an idea of how long they can actually go for. Attack Gypsy, are we going to see Necrons during Psychic Awakening at all? I thought the next book said it has Necrons. If not, yeah, you got it. You're definitely, they've already said that they're doing every single army. Mana Spark, what Necron stuff do you think is going to come out from the last book in Psychic Awakening? Oh, I have no idea. I thought they had a good pattern going on. Basically, make your own Tomb World, introduce some stratagems, some new relics, some psychic powers. Obviously, the Necrons can't have that, but give them. But there was some other cool, like the Tyranids had their enhancements where or adaptations. Instead of having a warlord trait, you could take an adaptation. The Tau had their like special signature systems that they could upgrade. If they came up with something like that for the Necrons, I think that would be cool. Just like that little set of things right there just helps update them, as long as they're well written, as long as you give them some stratagems. You write stratagems so that things that normally don't see a lot of use get more use, and you write the Necron Tomb World creation thing so it encourages a lot of different weird combos. Another question about what I'd like to see in 9th edition, which I've already answered. We're almost out of time for this episode. I plan, seeing how many questions there are, I might actually do a bunch more episodes to go out this week, but we'll just have to see. Here's a Necromunda question. Rorkula. Hey, Matthew, with the release of House of Chains for Necromunda, it is very likely that they will make an expansion for all the available gangs. Yes. Yeah, I'm expecting them to. Do you think it will be healthy for the game? Or will it be similar to the Kill Team releases? And also, if you are in favor of the expansions, what would you like to see? I have just said I love when more books come out. Now, there is a problem when there's so many books that, like, I want to play this army, and you need 4 or 5 books. And so they need to make a way that that's not necessary. Age of Sigmar, they've done it with their app. I love the Age of Sigmar app that Games Workshop has come out with, because then they can come out with as many books and FAQ and errata updates as they want. And all I need to do is purchase them in the app, and then it keeps them all together when I build my army. So I think that is a really, really good idea. For Necromunda, well, you have sources or resources like yaktribe.games or .game. Games? I don't know. Search for Yak Tribe, Y-A-K tribe, and you'll find them. They have a good gang roster creator, and that combines the rules from all the different sources. And so it doesn't give you the rules, but it lets you to kind of have them all together when you're creating your gang. But I haven't actually looked at the one that just came out with the House of Chains, but I think it's complete. Like, if you want to play Goliath, you don't need to have the Gangs of the Underhive. You just need that book. And if that's the case, that's awesome. It's basically a codex for Goliath. And in which case, that's awesome. That's great. It's almost like the Gangs of the Underhive was a compendium until they could come out with these individual books for them. And I think that's a great idea. I like more content. I always like more ways to play. Give me more ways to play my game. Black Templar, what did you think of Astartes Episode 5? Oh my goodness, that was awesome. I had to read a lot of comments and do some searching around to figure out what the heck was going on. That wasn't clear. I couldn't really understand the dialogue, but the visuals, it made me want to make narrative campaigns so bad. And I just wanted to steal the idea that he had too and make a narrative campaign about it. I have no idea what the author's expectations are for what he's going to continue doing with that storyline, or what even was totally going on. But I should actually just contact him and be like, hey, you want to work together to make a narrative campaign about that? Because it was just such a cool feel to it. Just the environment and the ambience of it was just awesome. I loved it. It was so 40K. It just felt on point. It felt more 40K than some of the stuff that Games Workshop has come out media-wise. Like, it just was right. Out of the feel of it, the grim darkness of it, the chaos horror aspect of it was great. So hats off. That whole series was great. I loved every aspect of it, and that last episode was no exception to it. The only problem I have with it, the only critique I'd have with it, is that I had no idea what was really going on, and I had to basically look at other people's commentaries and do some research and read through a lot of the comments on YouTube until people were able to kind of piece all the parts together. So I don't know if that was the intent, but it did make it a little harder to understand. But visual-wise, it was awesome. Okay, what are we at? We're about 45 minutes. I wanted this to be between 45 minutes to an hour because I wanted a bunch of episodes. So I'll answer a couple more questions before I finish this episode. Lord Scryer, what are your thoughts on the current Age of Sigmar lore, and where would you like it to go next? I think the Age of Sigmar lore is fantastic. I love the high fantasy-ness to it. It's my opinion that they should go all out with the magical craziness of it. Like I've already said in this video, that they should also make sure there's room for the lower level stuff as well. Because I feel like there's plenty of regular fantasy out there. And there's lots of high fantasy out there too. It's not like they are inventing this genre and everything they're doing is perfectly unique. That's nigh impossible at this point, to have things that are perfectly unique. But I love it. I love a lot of the books. I haven't been able to read much Age of Sigmar novels recently. I haven't read many novels recently. I need to get back into reading, and I've kind of missed the inspiration that comes from that. So I feel like my brain's starting to settle into this whole home isolation thing, being stuck at home. I have a funny feeling we're going to be here for a little while. And so now I'm starting to get into a rhythm of things and be like, okay, yeah, at first it was like, oh, is it just going to be for a couple weeks? And so it's hard to get your brain into something when it's only going to be 2 weeks. But if you think it's going to be a couple months, then all of a sudden that gives you more time to settle in and figure out what you're going to do. So I might try to get more. I did recently read some 40K short stories about Blackstone Fortress, and they were really cool. It was neat. They weren't all perfectly well written, but it was neat to kind of just get rapid fire tidbits of the inner workings of the Blackstone Fortress. So, James Stockdale, out of the current 40K armies available, you have to get rid of one army from the game altogether. Which one do you get rid of and why? No, you cannot pick individual chapters of Space Marines. If I had to get rid of one, that's a hard choice because I've grown to like them all. But if I had to, I'd say maybe Necrons. Mainly not because I don't like them, but because I feel that in Warhammer 40K, Necrons fit perfectly fine. But if you really just kind of drill down, it's a game, it's that the universe is about people versus chaos. And so anything that doesn't really have to do with that, now, Necrons of course do. Like, heck, the war in heaven of the Necron tier versus the old ones, and how the old ones then created the Eldar and a lot of the other psychic races, and that led to all these different problems. It all ties together really nicely. If anything, it should be Tyranids. I just can't say Tyranids because I love them too much, because they're really the aliens to the galaxy. But then it's cool to have aliens to the galaxy as well. The hard thing is writing everything as the ultimate threat. When you read the Tyranid Codex and the Tyranid lore, it's like, oh, they're the ultimate threat. And then you read the Necron lore, and you're like, no, they're the ultimate threat. And then you read the Orc lore, and you're like, no, they're the ultimate threat. And you read your Chaos lore, and you're like, oh, no, they're the ultimate threat. It's like, well, which one? Because if the Tyranids eat everything, Chaos is gone. So I guess Tyranids are the ultimate threat. It's like, but how big are the Tyranids? They can write them that pretty much what's in the galaxy, that's it. That's it. And in which case, they're not as big a threat, because they're just going to be a menace. And the Orcs can never quite get together to get it to be a big enough threat, but they have done that once or twice. But it always seems to break down before they can conquer the entire galaxy. And then if they did conquer the whole galaxy, then what? So, but if I had to choose one, yeah, probably Necrons. If it had to be from the Imperium, then it might be, and I could easily get a lot of flack for this, it might be like Sisters of Battle. Not because, I don't know, I think the whole game was created in the 80s, right? And so you got, the Space Marines are all guys. And so if you wanted girls, it was Sisters of Battle, which were basically the girl form of Space Marines. Whereas in Age of Sigmar, Stormcast Eternals were created much later. And so they're just like, yeah, it can be a guy or it can be a girl. It doesn't really matter. And so it would be kind of interesting if that could be retconned all back together. So the Space Marines were more like the Stormcast Eternals, where there can be guy Space Marines and girl Space Marines, rather than having this division between the two. Because I think that'd be more interesting. It's not even like a politically correct thing. I don't even care about it for that reason. I think it would just be cooler just to not have those separated, but to have that mixed together. It could create a much more interesting dynamic of the whole thing. When you read the novels, it just works. It just works to do that. So maybe that's what I would do. I'm not sure. Thankfully, I don't have to make that choice. Kyle Haywood, now that you're a veteran of 8th edition 40K, which edition has been your favorite, and which edition has been the most balanced in your experience? Ooh, balance. 8th edition is probably my favorite, but more like for the first year it came out. After that, maybe the second year too. And then it started to get bloated. But that happens with all the editions. I started in 4th edition, and it wasn't 4th edition for very long. Like, it was about a year into me starting 40K that it switched to 5th edition. Like, I came in right before Apocalypse came out for the first time. And I remember 7th edition, I remember by the end, I didn't really like it. And then 8th edition I loved. And now by the end, I'm not liking it as much. So I think I just like when they come out with a new edition, to be honest. But having said that, I do remember thinking when 8th edition came out and I played it, I'm like, this is really good. This is a really good set of rules compared to all the previous editions that I have played. So I have to say 8th edition has been my favorite, which is nice that the latest edition is my favorite. Dev the Wev. What do you think Games Workshop is going to do to try and recover from this whole Corona thing after it's over? Oh man, that's not a question for Games Workshop. That's a question for the world. What's everybody going to do? I think, it's hard to say. It's really hard to say. Obviously, it's going to hurt their bottom line right now. We have been fortunate here at Mini Wargaming that because we're a media company and because we have such a good audience, people have really stepped up and helped us, but even we're feeling the effects of it as well. So what's Games Workshop? They're just going to get back to work, just like everybody else. And there might be a period of time where they have to recover, but I think they're financially secure enough that they're not going anywhere. It'll probably just push things back. I think in the long run, as a company, you're not going to really notice much, except everything being delayed. Individuals within the company might notice if they get laid off because there has to be some adjustments there. But the company itself, I think, will do just fine. So, one more question. Gwell, 22. Out of all the Age of Sigmar armies you've played, which one would you say are your favorites thus far? For a while, I'd say Destruction. So I really enjoyed Gloomspite Gitz. I really enjoyed Iron Jaws, especially when they came out in Orc War Clans. And then I've been really enjoying the Ogre Maw tribes as well. So Destruction, if I had to choose one of the 4 Grand Alliances and only play armies from that, Destruction would be there. And then with the new Gargant Battletome, I'm excited for that one, even though I don't know how they're going to balance the Battletome of all giants. That'll be interesting to see what they do with that. But I just love the monsters of Age of Sigmar, so I'll enjoy that one too. So Destruction definitely has been my favorite. But then one of the non-destruction armies that basically competes for my favorite would be Cities of Sigmar. And I've played a dozen games with them, and I just love the variety I can do and how interesting they feel and mixing the army up. They seem like the right way to have allies, to be honest. I never bring allies in any game of Age of Sigmar because it doesn't really work anymore. But Cities of Sigmar seems to be like the way to do allies, where you bring all these different factions together and then you write different cities or different rules that obviously lend themselves towards certain ones more than others. And so I would say that Cities of Sigmar by far has been my favorite. I've enjoyed things like Fire Slayers. Stormcast Eternals have been fine. Not a big fan of the Death ones, playing as them or against them. The Chaos stuff is fun. I haven't really played a lot of the Chaos. I played against a lot of Chaos, but I haven't played as them just because there's other people in the office that always play them, but I could see myself really getting into that. A lot of the other Order armies are less interesting to me, but I don't know. But I'd say Cities of Sigmar would be my favorite with all the Destruction armies right next to it as well. Okay, I'm going to end right there. There will be plenty of future episodes. I still have a lot more questions to go through, so I'll just create more. So make sure you leave your questions in the comment section below, and in future episodes, I will try to get to them. And don't forget that if you have any Happy Wargaming news for the whole COVID-19 pandemic thing, then send me an email, matthew@miniwargaming.com with subject line Happy Wargaming. And having said that, make sure you stay safe, wash your hands, and happy wargaming.